average stay in a refugee camp these days is about how long?
Sometimes years, I don't know.
Over 7 years, the average stay. So in that environment, the tents and things like that that work right after the disaster is not your long-term solution. And military involved or not. So because of the bureaucratics, there's no one organization that's looking at all of these. DOD will look at this piece, and DHS will look at that, and state will look at that. So this is a coalition. We've got people from Netherlands to Singapore. I'm from National Defense University. We have people from Engineers Without Borders, basically college students and graduate students. Johns Hopkins, San Diego State, Anthropological University in Singapore, American Red Cross, National Institute of Urban Search and Rescue. So it's a broad military, non-military coalition. And we're looking at 7 infrastructures: shelter, water, power, integrated combustion and solar cooking, heating, lighting, cooling, sanitation, and lots of information communications technologies. The origin of this is the military logisticians came to us and said, look, when we deploy, we military deploy to these environments, all we have to bring is the tightly integrated, deployable, mil-spec systems that are already committed to operation plans and on custody cards. So we have to give them back at the end. So can you guys think of things that are low cost, appropriate to the stressed population, and expendable, so we can leave them behind at the end?
Right.
So that's what we're trying to do. So, for example, here in the shelter, this is $340 retail at Home Depot. It's called a hexayurt. I think Mongolian yurt in the form of a hexagon. Because the panels are twice as wide as they are high, if you cut them on the diagonal, the triangles less form block in the roof of the hexagon. So you can assemble this in the field with nothing more than a knife and tape and some tie ends. This is something the Rotary Club does, called a shelter box, and it includes not only a tent, but also in about a 30-inch by 30-inch box, sleeping bags, cooking utensils, mosquito nets, things like that, for 10 people, plus water purification for 6 months. And this is about $1,000, shipping anywhere in the world, but importantly by a Rotary channel, so don't get wrapped up in the corruption of the local government or the bureaucracy of the UN channels. This is called a unifold, and it's a collapsible shelter, accordion shelter, which took us about 8 minutes to just kind of pop open. And the beauty of this is it has a floor, so very interesting. So, if you want to set something up quickly, and these run $2,500. We've been doing weather testing of this stuff this winter, and this has actually come to me. In fact, you can get this with different ultraviolet treatments. And so you could either have 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, 7 year ultraviolet, after which it degrades to biodegradable dust, doesn't leave a 20,000-year plastic scar on the landscape. So these are kind of some of the shelter options. One of the things that USAID offers are very strong on, what they call the local materials stock. So you don't want to fly in all kinds of stuff that's not native to the area. And after a disaster especially, you'd like to put the people to work, rebuilding. So this is a $70 manually operated brick maker from Zimbabwe. And so one of the things AID has said is that Star Times could help the U.S. military introduce these kinds of ideas into their discussions with counterparts. So the military would think, yeah, building capacity of my country for economic development is part of my mission, or for disaster relief, whatever, along with traditional military missions. They'd see that as a big win, so we're trying to push this to shelter. Water, there are different models here, because the model for stabilization and reconstruction in a city like Fallujah is different from the model of refugee camps in Darfur, is different than major disasters in the Andes. But as a general principle, with regard to infrastructure, if you can keep the owner of the infrastructure and the protector of the infrastructure and the user of the infrastructure as the same person, you're by and large better off than splitting them up. So the problem obviously in Iraq is the power grid is owned by one group of people, it's protected by somebody else, and used by somebody else. So in the case of water, this is a black plastic bag covered with bubble wrap. If you can get water to about 65 degrees centigrade and hold it there for say 6-8 hours. You will kill all sorts of nasty stuff like E. coli and hepatitis A and cholera and typhoid. There's a little beeswax melts at 67 degrees centigrade. And so inside the cap of this thing, there's little beeswax indicators. You can see right away if the water got hot enough. So if you have a really nice well with sweet water, but you pump it into a bucket of unknown cleanliness, you may still be not well off. In this case, you're pasteurizing both the water and the potato fluids. Alternatively, if you don't use black plastic, this solar cooker is made out of cardboard and aluminum foil. And they're actually making these in some of the African refugee camps. Women are using them to keep make money. This will get a pot to about 275 degrees Fahrenheit. And Pat McCardle, who's been with us on a lot of these, has cooked us baked cakes, cooked wonderful chicken stews. Also, you can cook just as well in here as you can in others. In addition, obviously the sun doesn't shine all the time. So these are combustion stoves basically made out of old tin cans. And through the combination of the solar plus the high efficiency thermal, and then something called a retained heat basket, a wicker basket with a palm fronds or something like that, you can reduce fuel consumption by 75 to 80% over 5 So in a place like Darfur, where around the refugee camp we have this increasingly large circle of deforestation, and it's the women who are most at risk because they have to go out and gather the firewood and things like that. I mean, cutting back the wood is really a big deal. And you can also use the sun to pasteurize the water if you don't happen to have the black plant. So we're trying to get ideas that cross infrastructure, so you're not just dealing with whole systems thinking. The energy model originally was an 80-watt solar panel powering AA batteries. And these are chargers that will recharge a AA battery in about 15 minutes. Another model is you give each family the batteries and the charger. And this takes about a day to recharge. But you give everybody 6 or 8 batteries, and they can choose to use it for lighting, or for cooling, or for cooking fans, whatever you want to use it for. With that, the LED, it gives you not only bright light, but really high efficiency. You get hundreds of hours for all the battery. And then if you take it at night and shine it in this thing with all the facets on it, you can actually light up the whole tent. Yeah.
How much does, say, the solar battery charger or this solar battery charger, how much does that cost?
So that one was about $555 off the internet. We didn't try to get just bulk discounts. These are about $10. And actually, this turned out, we learned a lot in doing this. The way this originally went, it was DC out of the solar panel into a static inverter to convert it back into AC. AC to the battery charger was converted back into DC. So you probably lost half the power in the conversion. So it eventually wound up just with a formality to clip on it.
Well, I was just thinking that batteries can only be recharged so many times. And solar power is kind of expensive.
So Rayovac, which has a charger, actually will give you 50 cycles on the battery, which is better than most. In addition, the model here is, the model we started with is, imagine a place like Darfur, there isn't any alternative.
Right.
And what you don't want to do is set up a big central power plant and run wires all over the camp. You want to keep the infrastructure distributed. And so the model here is AA's as the energy source to everybody. And it turns out that AA's has been a lot more research done than AAA's in terms of getting energy density up and things like that. So that's why we picked AA. Now the other piece I don't know if you've seen is this dramatic improvement in solar panels over the past 2 or 3 months, with some now that are printable on inkjet printers. You actually generate the solar panels through an inkjet printer with special ink. And that looks like it's going to cut the cost from a factor of about 4. And this is just routinely coming down. The most exciting thing actually is Korean researchers announced last year that potentially by 2012, 2015, expected to lead to 10 cent per watt solar panels. So a house roughly is 10 kilowatts. So 10 cents a watt is $1,000 for taking your house completely off the grid. Great. And taking your house completely off the grid, and that's a game changer. That now lets plug-in hybrids be plausible. Put a windmill on top of your house, put the batteries in the basement, and really now you can begin putting the power out of each house back into the grid. Changes the game completely. So, we talked about the cooking, heating. This is kind of interesting. Last year, or not, a couple of years ago in Europe, there was a heat wave, and a whole bunch of elderly people just died in their homes. So this British guy got this idea for something called Sleep Breeze. So a room air, just plugged in?
Just hold it down.
Turn off. Give my technical advisor. Anyway, a room air conditioner is about 2,000 watts. A room fan is about 80 watts. And this is called a Sleep Breeze. It's 4 watts. What you do is you lie down, put this on the bed next to you or on the floor next to your mat, and it just blows the air right on your body. Again, powered by AA batteries. So again, the energy model here is do as much in AA as you can. So when you're trying to go to sleep, I'm told that it's helpful you need to lower the body temperature by about 2 degrees before people fall asleep. And so then hot weather, this lets you do that, then you fall asleep, you don't feel you're warm again particularly. But that's kind of the point here. And there's a little timer on it, so it shuts off. You get about 6 hours total office setting.
You want to know how much that costs? I think it's about 40 or 50 bucks.
Yeah, it's about, right now in early production runs, it's about 40, 50 bucks.
Is the idea to have this on all night? Obviously.
No, there's a timer, and it actually shuts off after, I don't know what it is, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, something. It's to help people get to sleep. And then it shuts off. If you want to run it all night, you probably run it all night. But, I suppose the ideal model is somebody goes to sleep, next person takes it, and goes to sleep, next person takes it, and whatever.
What would be like the target market?
Well, there's a whole batch. I mean, one could be campers. It was actually designed as an emergency system for people who had elderly relatives who might get caught in the heat wave, like killed all those people in Europe. And so I would think the campers and the elderly is what I would think of as the principal market here. But you could also imagine it for refugees and people like that.
But it's not a protection measure, it's to help them get to sleep.
Right.
Well, it can also be used to just, in extreme hot environments, to keep your body temperature low enough that you don't sustain damage to your organ systems. Yeah.
Energy for you to cool down.
Yeah. It's compared with a room air conditioner or a room fan, it's a fraction of the wattage, and it also runs an AC if you want that.
Mm-hmm. So it depends on the context. Yeah.
So the biggest weakness we have actually in StarTide at this point is sanitation. It's really surprising how little good research there is on sanitation for stressed environments. You got porta potties and things like that, but that's not what you're going to use out in Darfur. And composting toilets is really expensive. And in places like Myanmar now, you have flooding, you can't use trenching tools. So what's the answer? Don't know. This is actually an area where we need to do some serious research. It turns out the people in Singapore actually doing some of the best work on this. So a lot of information and communications technology. We had our first demonstration of this last year. We started with the cold, dark, quiet field. And one of the things to remember is that unclassified information, the ability to share it, is not a nice-to-have adjunct to kinetic phasing. If you can't communicate, collaborate, translate, engage effectively with civil military mission partners outside the boundaries of the DoD, you cannot achieve the social, political, and economic goals for which the military forces are committed. This is not a nice-to-have thing. So, let me take this. Welcome here. Would you continue, Paul?
Well, a very timely appearance here by Vinay Gupta, who is the inventor of a number of these systems, including the Hexier low-cost structure and some other things here. So why don't I let Vinay take it from here? And is there a question?
About actually the shelter.
Yes.
What material is that actually?
This was built in America.
And in the States, in the American supply chain, they have an enormous quantity of this material, which is used for insulating walls. So this was just bought at Home Depot for about $15 a sheet. The reason that you'd be interested in building this kind of temporary shelter in America from materials in the supply chain is catastrophic disaster. For example, if you had something like the Bay Quake, you could see 500,000 people homeless. If you had a nuclear event, you could see 10 to 20 million people homeless. And this material is used so much that there's enough to build shelters for about 500,000 people a day, just from what's in the supply chain before you step up production. And you take tape, you can use, there's a very big tape that's kind of specialized, or you can use ordinary parcel tape. And people can be trained how to build one of these shelters in about half an hour, and then after that they can produce a shelter in an hour. So you can imagine enormous volunteer teams coordinating to rehouse people after a disaster like this, which is very hard to do otherwise. The FEMA shelters cost something like $2 billion to purchase for housing for 150,000 people. And it's very expensive to stockpile enormous shelter resources. So those are not great materials. They don't produce a permanent shelter. They've got lots of flaws, but it will stand in a 60-mile-an-hour wind. You can build it quickly, and if something horrible happens, you have an option. In South America, the supply chain for these kind of materials is not so strong. So you have to improvise with things like plywood, and you can build smaller shelters that way and maybe use nails instead of rope. You have to adapt the design. But the building is made from standard 4x8 sheets. So the walls are just whole sheets, and the roof is made of half sheets, where you cut it on the diagonal and then assemble it into the roof triangle. So anybody can be taught to do this. It's very easy. If you have a table saw, you can just run these things out. So that's the Hexier.
So that takes us through pretty much all the systems of the 7 infrastructures that we're focused on currently. Maybe it's good to see what questions you have. Yeah.
So what's your background in? Like environmental engineering?
Well, let's see, video games. I used to be a software engineer, and video games are very much about triangle meshes, right? It's 3D graphics, which is all the same mathematics as geodesic domes. And when you try and make a geodesic dome that can be mass-produced for refugees, you wind up simplifying and simplifying and simplifying. So that's where the structure came from. All of the infrastructure, the lights and the solar cookers and all the rest of the stuff, the idea of assembling the whole system comes from a place called the Rocky Mountain Institute, which builds on the work of a man called Buckminster Fuller. And in about 1935, Buckminster Fuller filed a patent for a self-contained apartment building, like a 5-story apartment building, that would be made of steel tubes, flown in by airship, and it had plans for self-contained toilets, power generation, water purification, in like 1935. And it was a practical design. It could have been manufactured, although nobody ever did. So this idea of packaging buildings together with all their infrastructure has been around for a long time, largely in the environmentalist world. But I came at it from a very different angle. I came at it from kind of energy policy and video games. Have we talked through the whole thing about whole systems design? Have you been introduced to this idea?
You just hinted at it and some of the cross-integration of the systems. Yeah.
So the core of whole systems design is that you cover everything necessary to get a breakthrough in performance. If you're, a dollar late and a day late and a dollar short, you don't get a breakthrough. You can put all of this work into a system and you can make improvement after improvement after improvement. But if there's one thing left holding you back, you won't get overall performance. So whole systems are about going through every single piece of the system and making sure that it works towards your long-term performance goal. And this is called whole systems thinking. So in the case of all this refugee stuff, the goal is very much to be able to take populations, rapidly provide for all their needs, and then when it's possible to resettle them because the disaster is over or peace is broken out, you want this ability to fan them back out in small groups or individual households. So if you set up a large camp and you provide reverse osmosis water purification and a large generator, when the time comes to send these people home, you're sending them back to nothing. Now, it's very problematic. So the idea came from an event run at the Rocky Mountain Institute, including participation from Dr. Eric Rasmussen. And their idea was you need some way of basically providing for the refugees at sort of household level, so that when you get an opportunity to send them back, you can send them back to their own villages, one household at a time, and you transport their equipment with them. So if you gave them one of these to purify their water, when the time comes to send them back, they take it with them. So they're not bound by the infrastructure, so you don't have the same pressure against providing them with decent services. You know, there's a lot of political pressure in the refugee business to try and stop making the refugees too comfortable so you can eventually
So
force
they'll
them
actually
out.
want to go back.
Right. And, you know, there's an enormous amount of fear of permanence in this. So by making it both high quality and also inherently transitory, you have this idea that you provide for the refugees initially quite a high standard of living. They'll be doing better if they have this equipment as refugees than many of them were before they came, because they'll have clean water, they'll have light to read by, all this kind of stuff. But you don't have the same spectre of permanence, because as soon as you send them home, this goes from being humanitarian relief to being development aid. And that's a key transition. You know, it was the case that humanitarian relief and development were very separate systems. And now I think it's clear that the technology permits us to actually integrate humanitarian relief and development aid as a single system. So when you have a disaster and there's all of this money flowing through the system to, you know, immediately help people, you put in tools which will last for a long time, and you put in tools which they themselves can buy more of when they need them.
So Renee mentioned the Rocky Mountain Institute. Maybe you know what the Rocky Mountain Institute is. So this is a group you probably want to get to know more about. It's called RMI, located in Snowmass, Colorado. And the founder is a guy named Amory Lovins, who's been a recipient of one of the MacArthur Genius Grants and things like that. But he has been a proponent for a long time of something called natural capitalism, which basically says if you can maintain the same amount of output, but half your input, your profits go up. So there's nothing wrong with, from a capitalist perspective, in being environmentally friendly or green. You can actually make a lot of money by doing this. And by the way, you get all kinds of collateral benefits of the planet, things like that. So it's actually has been an advocate of growth under these conditions for actually reducing the amount of input per unit of output. He's also got a very interesting piece about 2 years ago called Winning the Oil Endgame, which basically is how to get America off oil at a profit with no, get us off hydrocarbons. So anyway, RMI, just go to the website, it's a very interesting organization. And something for you to think about is he has asked a question, what is real security? Suppose you would define security as freedom from fear of privation and freedom from fear of attack. Those two things for all people on the planet. It really changes the calculus as to where you would make your national security investment dollars, if that was the metric that we're trying to pursue. There's something to think about. Anyway.
Do you have any other questions? What kinds of things are you interested in?
How do you implement, or how do you decide where to go to implement this? Does somebody contact you, or do you offer your services?
Let me take the first part of that. Although we have a broad coalition involved in this, the coordination of Star Tides is largely being done right now at National Defense University in conjunction with partners like the Hexier Project, which Renee runs. So our customers tend to be at this point U.S. government, which is to say the combatant commanders within the military and USAID often and things like that. So I've gone to the commanders of the Southern Command, the Northern Command, which is continental United States, Canada, Mexico, and African Command, and said, what scenario keeps you up at night? So Admiral Stavridis, the Southern Command commanders, come back and said, major hurricane in western and Central America with lots of homeless and floods. And that's now been refined down to Nicaragua in October, November, roughly 180,000 homeless. So the model here is how do you take the Star Tides infrastructures and decide which mix of them would be most appropriate for the scenarios the customers are asking about. So I think Northern Command is going to come back and say one of two things. Either earthquake on the New Madrid fall to winter, or a natural or man-made disaster in the national capital region of Washington. Africa Command is probably going to come back and say, drought in sub-Saharan Africa with lots of displaced people. So what we find is none of these solutions, none of these solutions is going to be right for everyone. The hexier, because it can be produced in this model in very large numbers out of the U.S. commercial supply chain, might be actually a good way to get people out of the elements in, say, Northern California earthquake or New Madrid earthquake in winter. But this is not long-term shelter for the American people. This might be a dramatic increase in the standard of living for people in Darfur, but it violates the local materials doctrine. So we've been looking a lot in the last sort of 72 hours at communications infrastructures for NGOs in Myanmar. What would you want to deploy to get internet connectivity and Wi-Fi clouds and cell phone towers? Well, it turns out in tropical rainy seasons, you don't want to deploy KU-band satellite terminals because they have too much rain phase. You want to deploy C-band terminals. That leads you to, okay, only these satellites are ones you could use and not others. So the question is, what is the mix for scenario A, scenario B, scenario C of these? And how do you analyze it? What's a structured way to say under what criteria will we evaluate a shelter to see whether it's suitable for A, B, C, or D? And then the next phase of StarTides, about a year, would actually be how would you test it? Should we get a field somewhere and blow wind on it and drop rain on it and things like that and see how it would work? So the answer is we try to go to our customers, and I have no problem. My guess is there are probably 40 or 50 generic scenarios that'll handle most everything. Earthquake in the Andes is about the same as earthquake in Nepal, is about the same as, except in Chile you might have lots of good telecommunications and power, but you wouldn't have that in Bhutan, whatever. So how do you balance that? If you're in a pure refugee camp situation, then Vinay's model of one infrastructure per family might work. If you're doing stabilization and reconstruction in Fallujah, where there's already a city of 300,000 and some infrastructure around, some different model. So what we're trying to get to ultimately is a series of templates that will let us come in and analyze a customer saying, help, I'm in this situation. You're never going to see a StarTides flag in the field handing out MREs. Our goal is to provide reach-back knowledge on demand for line decision makers and folks working in the field. So whether it's the combatant commander, whether it's an NGO, whether it's the president of a country, whether it's the Latin America, the American Union, what's the term right here? Inter-American, what? No, just, okay, I'm saying political organization. Anyway, whether it's the African Union or whatever, whoever has the line responsibilities, we're there to support. So it's been a really fun project.
What was the second half of your question?
That
You were asking how do we get it? Yeah, this is also one of the places where, I mean, there's a lot of history to this question. Technologies like this solar cooker, and this is a roughly 15 or 20-year-old technology. And right now, something like 5 million people a year die because they don't have access to clean drinking water. And if you do the numbers, this is not an expensive item. If you make it with slightly higher spec materials, it could last for generations. This is just metal sheet, and you cleaned it when it got dirty. It could last for generations. 5 million people a year die this way. It's a Holocaust a year. And you get about the same kind of numbers when you start looking at things like efficient wood stoves. The smoke inhalation from people cooking over open fires accounts for about 5 million people a year. And when you add up all of these little failures of infrastructure and look at the total public health impact, it's enormous. It's 20 or 30 million people a year. The other factor that's driving all of this is that the technology is getting better. And I think this is a very important thing to remember when you're thinking about the future. This is an example of a very simple system. This is rural electrification, right? Some rechargeable batteries, and a little solar panel, and a very, very bright and very cheap flashlight. The whole thing is about $35. But 10 years ago, the LED that was in this did not exist. And instead of getting 6 hours of light from 2 batteries, you would have gotten about 30 minutes. The rechargeable batteries were 5 times the price, and the solar panel was 3 times the price. So what you've had in the past 10 years is this system got 30 times cheaper or better. And the same kind of process is happening to communications technology. It's happening to big electrical infrastructure. There are now solar panels which are cheaper than coal plants are. So what we're going to see is this enormous rotation in the way that the world works, as suddenly the poor and people in distressed situations have access to a phenomenal new level of technological support. And we're talking about 4.5 billion poor people going through something that looks like an industrial revolution.
So in the model, waterborne diseases, when you use different numbers, let's just say it's 3.5 million people a year roughly that have waterborne disease. And that's the equivalent of, on the order of, it's 10,000 people a day. That's on the order of 30 full 747s every day crashing, killing everyone on board just to waterborne diseases. And of course, it never meets our threshold. So these kind of small changes can just make enormous differences.
And those differences will come up to the social level as well. I mean, if you think about all the political unrest and anger that there is in the world about poverty, on one hand, these technologies will lift people out of the worst consequences of poverty. Your children start living, you don't lose like 1 in 10 under the age of 5. On the other hand, when you've got access to ICT, your perspective on history and on the world expands very rapidly.
So with regard to ICT, we talked about the information sharing, but in a disaster, comms, lift, and power, situational awareness, and the networks to share it are often thought of as techie adjuncts to the major muscle movements of delivering food, shelter, and water. But in fact, without the situational awareness and ability to share it, it's the critical enabler of everything else that happens. You don't know where the roads are out. You don't know where the bridges are washed out. You don't know how to get the food to the airport to the flooded areas. So this stuff needs to go in the first tranche after a disaster, not in somewhere deep in the recovery phase like it normally is thought of. So this is one of the pieces. So when you talk about Gator at all, this is a satellite dish.
This is fabulous.
It's an inflatable satellite dish, weighs 77 pounds, fits in a duffel bag, throw it in the King Air, fly it wherever you want it. When it blows up, inside there's a membrane. You put differential pressure on the membrane, and because of the differential pressure, the membrane becomes parabolic. It's reflective. Screw on the feed horn to the focal point, and within an hour of the time you get it there, you've got 512 up, 2 megs down, T1 connectivity basically anywhere in the world.
And the Ericsson rig next door, if you connect it to the other end of this, will then take that backhaul bandwidth and then turn it into cell phone access and HDPSA, so you can actually run computers off it. So you've got this potential to very quickly turn up, put up a mast, put up the satellite, and it's, people have their basic communications. As the technology continues to evolve, that kind of stuff is going to become more and more possible and more and more useful.
So we've been doing a lot of work in Nangarhar province in eastern Afghanistan around Jalalabad. There are 50,000 students in the University of Nangarhar, Jalalabad. They have a 256K dial-up internet connection for 50,000 people right now. Last month we got a Gator in there, and now all of a sudden they have T1 size access. Still not great for 50,000 people, but it's a qualitatively different thing. Now they can actually access the web, download video. And one of the things that's just astonishing, and this is for your generation to try to change, is if you look at the priority, it's $9,500 a month to get the bandwidth off the Gator, probably $3,500 a month off a different type of antenna. With all the money we're spending in Afghanistan, neither USAID nor the American Embassy nor the government in Kabul thinks that that's a worthwhile investment to get information to the next generation of Afghans. And so, why not? How do we change that?
One of the core trends in all of this is that power is moving down the pyramid and towards the edges. I know this is a big part of US DoD thinking, but it's also happening for individuals. Once you've got in 20 years, you're going to see kids all over the developing world who got the equivalent of a university education watching the free videos that MIT is putting online right now. And the implications of that for the way that the world is going to be transformed by these technologies are huge.
Except there's a pessimistic downside to that. And that is that people tend to congregate with those who share common views. And so whereas the internet connectivity will give you access to the knowledge of the world, it might also let you align with those who want to do e-madrasas or want to say the Holocaust never happened or line up with whatever Serbian nationalists, etc. And so it's a double-edged sword, and the technology is an enabler, can be good or bad. It can offer what Vinay's talked about, and also enable Al-Qaeda. So how do you find the right balance? So let me just stop for a minute and go back to you guys. What's your major?
International relations in Spain.
Are all of you international relations majors? Well, what about regions? Do you have a regional specialty?
Latin America.
Latin America? Latin America. So what have you seen here that's changed your thinking about anything, if at all?
I guess my question would be, who funds this? What's your sort of vehicle for implementation?
So the first demonstration we did with StarTides took less than $20,000 of government money. We got over $800,000 of private sector engagement. Companies just brought their stuff there, said, we'd like to show this off, it's kind of cool. So we're actually working now with Southern Command on some of the research and development work that Juan Hurtado was doing in terms of taking some of these technologies from just prototype stage to some next level of development. In addition, we've been talking with some of the folks in the U.S. Army South who actually run the exercises while just doing R&D. For example, next year in FOC, the question is, could we deliver, say, 5 or 6 full sets of integrated infrastructure, maybe of different types, and USARSO would get some Nicaraguans to offer them food and things like that, and they come live in them for a couple of weeks and see how they work.
And this is a very important part of this is these things have to be field tested. You know, a lot of these technologies have been around individually for a long time, but the assembled whole systems are relatively recent. When I put together the first one of these ultra-low-cost integrated infrastructure packages in 2003, there was nothing that had been done like that before. And even now, because it's such a different perspective and such a different way of looking at things, both the HEXIARC project and StarTides both have acute difficulties finding funding.
And let's say South goes like this. I mean, we're not an acquisition organization. We don't buy anything. What we do is provide the reach-back information to Southern Command or USARSO or somebody like that who has the money to buy it. And they say, okay, I'll do that, and I want 10,000 of them, and I want them by this time. So let's say they wanted to buy enough of these to handle 10,000 refugees into Guantanamo. That might be stockpiled by the government, they keep it in a warehouse, roll them out and use them. For this, in the New Madrid earthquake model, the U.S. commercial supply chain, Lowe's, Home Depot, whatever, makes enough of these things to house about 500,000 people a day. A lot of these things built in the system. So maybe the best model there is instead of having, let's see, 13 boards, I need to have 2 rolls of this tape, and I need to have tie downs, things like that. Home Depot stocks a Texier as a line item. So you just go inside and want 10,000 of them.
And that's something that can happen globally as well. One of the things we're working on is identifying all the areas where there's enough of an industrial base to make these in a material that suits the climate. You know, like if you're in northern Pakistan, you need some kind of hard plastic or something like this, so that you get this ability to very quickly pool resources from the main industrial supply chains and use them for humanitarian purposes. And that again gets back to the ICT. Right? I mean, there's no way that you can possibly organize those kinds of things and maintain a sort of global map of readiness without an enormous sort of electronic communications network to back that.
So everything we're learning, we're publishing on our website, and we're trying to StarTides.net, and we're trying to publish it as a wiki, so that if somebody says, well, gee, I did your instructions in step 9 before step 7 works better, they can come back and post that, and the next people who do it can see what the. So it's designed to be in kind of an interactive field manual. So StarTide itself doesn't take a lot of funding. Buying the stuff for it.
StarTides is basically supposed to, you look at finding all these things, you can put together a system that just throws this whole idea out there.
Yeah, it's a research effort to look at the possibilities. So maybe we find 110 different types of shelters, say, and maybe of those only 15 are suitable for the kind of situation we're looking at, and maybe of that only 3 work in Nicaragua, and a different 3 work in New Madrid Fault, and something else works in Darfur. So we just kind of provide advice to the customer the COCOM or AID or whatever, that says this looks like a reasonable collection of systems. We're going to be trying to do whole systems thinking, cross infrastructure. So, you know, if we have the earthquake in Nicaragua at the beginning of the rainy season, somebody says, well, don't bother to send me solar cookers for a while because there's no sun.
So StarTides is what does that?
Well, StarTides will provide some advice. No, StarTides doesn't ship any. StarTides.
No, they provide the advice. They say, well,
say.
these are the things that will work in this region.
Essentially, we present options.
So you're a bunch of social scientists that look at understanding the region and what their needs.
Well, we also try to tie the technology of
Yes.
this to
Yeah.
these situations.
I mean,
What we find in these situations is you need 5 things. You need a capability. You need a social network. In 2000, you need a capability, social network, the incorporation for the military of something called TTP. You know what TTP is? Tactics, techniques, and procedures. The problem is you can have all this great policy, but in order to let Lieutenant Wells or Sergeant Schwartz actually do something in the field, it has to have gotten down far enough so it's okay to share this information with this without having to go ask the colonel every time. So capability, social network, doctrine, policy, TTP. There may be some legal challenges. We'll talk about that in a minute. And you have to have enough money to deploy this stuff quickly. It doesn't have to be the whole budget. It has to be enough to get these in the first airplane to fly them to where they're going. The social network is, the sociology is about 10 times more important than technology in most of these areas, provided you've got the right mix of infrastructures. In tsunami, when I was still in Pentagon, I sponsored the deployment of 3 people to Southeast Asia. One was a Navy doc, one was a civilian doc, one was a retired Navy pilot. The 2 docs went to the UN liaison cell in Jakarta, where they were greeted with the process. Hey man, we were together in the Congo, we were together in Kosovo, we were together in Afghanistan. The social networks had been established. You didn't have the, can I trust this guy? The pilot could go on board the carrier, get high fives, hey man, let's go to the ready room and talk pilot. 3 days later when they got together, they found that the carrier was prohibited by some combination of policy or doctrine, TTP or something, with sharing information outside the military with anyone who didn't ask. NGOs didn't know they had to ask, didn't know how to ask, didn't know what to ask for. By the time these 3 guys got together on board the ship, in hours, CDs were being cut, information was being put together, and the instantaneous bandwidth of a helicopter full of CDs flying into the beach is pretty good. So you need the combination of the social networks and the capability to be able to have them. But the scuba diving, Bahasa Indonesian-speaking neuroscientist who's perfect for tsunami does you no good in the lower Ninth Ward in New Orleans. So there have to be a mix of social networks out there to give you the flexibility to handle the scenarios.
The sort of counterpoint to this is that looking for the areas where the technology enables breakouts tells you where to focus your energy on looking for opportunities. So that it's this kind of balance that you need the people to be able to deploy the technology, but the areas where you can get most leverage from your people are the areas where new capabilities are coming online. Like, these dishes, once these things are a commonly used standard part of response, it's going to change everything. Satellite bandwidth in the field on the first plane is a huge deal.
So one of the things we're trying to do is get a contract with a company that does technological forecasting. And we're not looking for cutting-edge R&D a decade out. We're looking for stuff that maybe in 2 or 3 years that is going to be widely enough available to be used in these type of situations. One of the very interesting food fights on the email over the last 72 hours is to what extent to Myanmar do you deploy only proven stuff or some new ideas? And some of the folks say, look, NGOs in the field where people are dying and lives are on the line, don't ask to be your beta testers. The other side says, but if you do that, you're only going to get the same stuff you had 5 years ago. You need to be able to introduce some new ideas, and I'm not sure what the right balance is, but it's really interesting.
And this is a persistent problem. The NGOs have a great problem funding technology research and a great problem innovating because they receive funds that are earmarked for taking practical action in a specific disaster, and they can't divert that to do engineering and research and development work. So there's a real problem in humanitarian innovation that nobody really has a dedicated budget to go out and solve humanitarian problems at a technology level. So it's one of the reasons that StarTides is so important, that it's beginning to move forward the idea that the enormous capability of the DoD to develop technology can be used to solve operational problems like SSTR issues, but at the same time the spin-off technologies could revolutionize life on the planet.
Anyway, so it's getting late. We'll be glad to sit and answer questions if you'd like. But if you have any questions or come back tomorrow, I appreciate very much the time. Thank you.
Thank you very much.